Welcome everyone, Costin here with a discussion about the Dwarven Legendary Lords in Total War Warhammer 3, ranking them from the best to the worst. Now generally I rank them from the worst to best. This time around I'm going to go in a different direction. I'm going to start with the very best and work my way to the worst. And the very best is Grombrindal, the White Dwarf. Great to confederate, great to play, great army, great lord effects. He's got and a good starting position. He's got everything that you may want, and also one of the best ways to deal with the initial grudges that you have. So let's talk about Grombrindal. Faction-wide, you're gonna get 20% weapon strength when fighting against elves, and since two of your grudges are to deal with the Dark Elves, or basically Malekith, to beat up Malekith, and the third is to beat up basically Alifanar, or any of the High Elves, but Alifanar is closest, so he'll do. This can be useful. Then you get Power of the Ancestors. Now, the Ancestors give you various benefits, but the strongest, as far as I'm concerned, is Grungni's Teachings. That's 20% research rate faction-wide, 20% upkeep for Grombrindal's army, construction cost reduction, and recruitment cost in local regions where he is. Right? Fairly substantial benefit from Grombrindal. So that's just a faction-wide benefit. If you confederate Grombrindal, you obviously lose out on the ancestor gods, but even then, Grombrindal is far more powerful than just his faction-wide benefits. Army-wise, if we look at his benefits, he gets 10 melee defense for Quarrelers, 50% reinforcement range, though that's not too significant, can be useful in some situations, but not too often. 10 leadership to his entire army, and special skill tree. This is where things get really, really good. So he's got a general lord skill, but his special yellow skill tree gives him 15% campaign movement range, Strider attribute, melee defense and armor piercing when defending, vigor loss reduction minus 50% on top of the 15% for the Lord's army from obstinacy, so mythical longevity, benefits to Iron Drakes and War Machine units. Now, I'm gonna take that to mean artillery, if I'm not mistaken, or I guess it could be gyrocopters. I'm not entirely certain what War Machines mean. Possibly gyrocopters and gyrobombers. But if it's artillery, it's good. If it's gyrocopters and gyrobombers, not so much, but still pretty good. Because Iron Drakes are actually pretty good units when it comes to a fight. Grimir's Resolve, which gives melee defense and Unbreakable, affecting all allies in an area. So great. Then he gets speed for his army, loses some weapon damage, but gets that back in terms of armor piercing damage. That's pretty decent, but that's not what's great. Nothing I've shown so far is what makes Grombrindal so amazing. Okay, it's his blue skill line, his special blue skill line. He gets legendary commerce, so that's 20% income from trade. That's pretty ridiculous. He doesn't necessarily have the best trading partners available early on, but once he gets going, he can have the highest trade income of all Dwarven Lords. Ergo, he can have the best economy of all of them. And it gets even better. Because obviously, he has the best economy, 20% upkeep for his army, significant early game advantage, then trade 20%, pretty good. But it gets even better. Ancient Acumen, up to 3 recruit rank for all armies faction-wide. Eager Kin, 15% recruit cost for all armies faction-wide. Fairly substantial. Absolutely Relentless is where it gets insane. 15% campaign movement range for all armies, faction-wide, for all characters. Basically all armies are gonna have a ridiculous movement point range. And yes, this does stack with Mountain Strider. So he's getting 30% extra campaign movement range. Then on top of that, Get Up. Get Up gives you up to 6% casualty replenishment rate. Now, this may not seem substantial, fair enough, but remember, dwarves don't have great casualty replenishment. Actually, they don't have any at all from heroes or anything like that. They have a structure. That structure gives them very little. To understand how much Get Up gives you, the barley field is 2%. It can go up to 5%. Grombrindal's special skill that you can get, whether or not you play him or you confederate him, gives more than a fully upgraded barley field. Then you get 1 global recruitment capacity and lightning strike. Okay, so he is amazing in terms of his faction benefits. Not the strongest army, far from it, but certainly the strongest campaign benefits by far and away. Now, he does have some downsides. One, the first one is that he's very far away from everyone else. So he will not be able to confederate other dwarven legendary lords. And he'll have to instead make deals with like the likes of Katep, maybe some ogres, all that kind of stuff. He does have a great starting position over here in the Spire, and he also gets a unique structure over here in the Spire with the repurposed holds. Fair enough. And it's fairly easy, actually, to wipe out Malekith. And to deal with other issues. Taurox, the Skaven, Valkia. Well, Valkia is a nightmare, but once you do deal with them, you've got this nice, safe little corner where no one's really going to bother you, especially if you make deals with Katep. He's going to be a very, very powerful ally. On top of that, because 2 of the grudges that you start out with basically involve beating on Malekith, it's very easy to essentially deal with the entirety of the grudge meter as Grombrindal, ever since they fixed the grudge meter in 2.2. And grudges will not spiral completely out of control very easily. Here's the thing. But here's one major downside that Grombrindal does have. Because he is so far away from every other dwarven legendary lord, he's not going to get access to all the unique settlements that the other dwarven legendary lords, including Thorek, who also is a bit far away from the dwarven capital, if you will. He's not going to get access to those special structures. So the blue skill line that he has is kind of making up for that, and actually more than makes up for that. But you're very far away from everyone else. All that said, though, Grombrindal certainly has, as far as I see it, the easiest campaign of the dwarves, the most playable campaign of the dwarves. He was actually the only dwarf legendary lord I'd consider even remotely playable before 2.2. Just because you could solve the grudges very easily, and now that you can, that the grudges are no longer a factor, it is a much, much better situation. Like, between your army, your starting army, and what you can recruit pretty early on, and Malekith, you beat the crap out of Malekith, hands down. Valkia may be an issue, but Malekith, Taurox, the Skaven, no issues whatsoever. And once you deal with your initial situation, it's like, you've got this corner, this entire corner of the map, you can secure yourself. It's like, you no longer will be under any threat. There is no endgame event to screw you over in the starting position. There is no enemy to screw you over except the ones that are going to come over here from the Chaos Wastes. Outside of that, you're in a really, really great position if you're playing Grombrindal. Although Valkia is, well, let's just say pretty scary to deal with. But you do have a great army to deal with her with Quarrelers that you can get. So yeah, Grombrindal, great campaign position, great situation with grudges, good lord defects, great to confederate if you can get them, but he's very far away from everyone else. And one final benefit that may not seem so obvious is he has 4 quests. Now, the items themselves, I would not necessarily say are the very best in the game, though there are some decent benefits here and there. The ward save from the rune axe and the armor, yeah, pretty decent. But here's the thing when it comes to that. You also get, for the set, diplomatic relations with dwarves plus furry. Pretty substantial in its own right. But because he has 4... because he has 4 quest battles, that means due to those 4 quest battles that he can earn a lot of gold when he starts doing them. And his quest battles are not hard either. Like, look at this. This is pathetically easy. Granted, I do have a full stack, but you get the point of what I'm talking about over here. And now just move him over there. That Beastman army is going to move in. Might be an issue. Might take some casualties with the warriors, but the quarrelers should be able to tackle that. No problem. So yeah, Grombrindal is like a genuinely good campaign. Though you are isolated, don't expect to get the best diplomatic game or trade game in the world, but do expect a much leisurely time compared to every other Dwarven Legendary Lord. Like, he is far above the others. Like, he scales far better than the others as well, because of this skill tree. Like 15% campaign movement reach for all your armies. That is insanely good when you look at it. Insanely good. And number 2 is Thorgrim Grudgebearer. He's got some great faction-wide benefits, and although he's not necessarily the best lord in combat, in fact he's probably the weakest in terms of personal combat potential, he does have some pretty good army benefits as well, and faction-wide benefits for his skill tree. Now, his faction-wide benefits give him more rewards from the grudges, which is great because the grudges feel like they give barely anything at all when you're dealing with them. They're more of a frustration than anything else to deal with. You do get 20 diplomatic relations with the dwarves, which is pretty substantial to get your diplomatic relations going with Zufbar, with Barakvar, and then eventually to confederate with Ungrim and Belegar. So that will help you a great deal when it comes to that. Then minus 15% upkeep for Longbeards and Hammers. Free recruit rank for Hammers. I don't really feel that matters all that much because Hammers are not really a good campaign unit. The reason is you want infantry as dwarves that can take a lot of damage. Longbeards can be good, sure, absolutely. Just a continuation on Dwarf Warriors, more expensive but better. But Hammers, not really. The reason is because they don't, they lack the shielded ability, so they're not blocking small arms missiles from hitting them. Though they are obviously good in melee, and they were actually recently buffed in Warhammer 3. Then the real benefit that he gets faction-wide, and why you may want to play Thorgrim, is all commandments have more powerful effects. This is not as substantial as Grombrindal's movement range and casualty replenishment, but that's tied to a lord, not a faction. You could confederate Grombrindal, good luck getting to him, or you could hope he gets wiped out and play with a mod that allows you to get him otherwise. But here's the thing. Why is this so important, so substantial? And it's actually one of the big reasons why Thorgrim is actually at number 2 on this list. See, you get the commandment and power of the guilds. By default, for other Dwarven lords, it's 15. For you, it's 25. That's a 10 growth difference. To understand how much 10 growth matters, the skill tree over here, like subsidies, toll market, heavy cornstones, that gives you 10. Now, you can upgrade the commandment by 15, but you're getting 10 by default. So you're getting, with the research over here, you're getting, with autonomy of the holds, 40 growth in each province. Now, you have to hold the entire province, but as a substantial benefit. But it's not just growth, either. You get a recruitment cost benefit with Master Skills in Stone, Hiking Tribute, 10% come from old buildings, which you can upgrade even further. Yes, even further. I think, what, you can get 15% with High King's Tribute, corruption benefit with Venerate Ancestors. Improving the commandments is gigantic, especially the growth one, because dwarves have poor growth from their settlements, so they do struggle to get their settlements to as high of a level. Also, yeah, recruitment cost reduction, fairly substantial for Thorgrim. Now, in terms of his quest items, he fast 4, can gain a lot of money. I would say Grombrindal actually has probably harder ones, but yeah, you do get some nice benefits. Control benefit, plus free benefit to control in all provinces. That helps with growth as well. Now, Lord effect wise, he has High King. Now, High King is not too great, though maybe having the Guardian ability for Hammerers could make it worth it to have maybe two or so in an army. Could give you a reason to actually have some Hammerers in an army if you do have it, but that's a benefit you can get, obviously, if you confederate them. Then you get Ancient Bloodline. Actually, you get High King first and foremost. High King gives melee buffs to all your melee units. The armor piercing is great, melee attack is great, base weapon damage is great. You also get grudges against various races, against Chaos, the Foul, Mankind, Undead, etc. So pretty good over there. Then you get control and growth benefits in a local province. Hero capacity for Fane, hero recruit rank for Fane. You're going to need the structure for this. Just keep in mind that. A benefit to Master Engineer, so you can get Master Engineers. And also benefit to Runesmith. And 7% research rate. It's not the 20% research rate that Grombrindal gets, but once you get this, you don't have to worry about it. Whereas Grombrindal has to decide which ancestor he's going to benefit. But yeah, you get more heroes than anyone else. This is actually gigantic for the dwarves. In particular, the benefit with the engineers. Why is that? Well, you need to understand how this works. To get a single engineer, you need the Tinker's Den. But the problem is that only gives you one capacity. Like, you only have one capacity, you're starting one capacity with engineers. Which obviously would be filled up by the engineer he starts with. Right? The fact that you can get 2 engineers with that special skill tree gives you a significant early game advantage. Because otherwise, to increase your engineer capacity, you need a tier 4 settlement. So Thorgrim is going to be able to maintain more engineers, runesmiths, smiths, and fanes compared to everyone else. But really, it's the engineer aspect that matters. Because runesmiths, you could just get rune lords instead, right? Fanes, yeah, the training aspect is nice, but that doesn't really matter. The engineers, however, do matter a great deal. The reason they matter is because they give you ammunition, they replenish ammunition, they give you more ammunition, just as much as the research that's dedicated. Like, this is just as much as the research over here for missile infantry units, and that's just for missile units. This is 20% ammo flat out. Missile weapon strength, artillery, campaign movement range, right? If Grombrindal is worth a lot, then Thorgrim is not necessarily too far away with just being able to get an engineering in all his armies, because by the time you get to a tier 3 settlement, you're not necessarily going to have more than 2 armies. You might have more than 3 by the time you get to tier 4, though if you focus on it a lot, you could certainly get Karazek to tier 4. Tier 4 pretty quickly if you focus on the extra growth. So Thorgrim, although he certainly is weakest in terms of his personal combat potential, because he just doesn't have significant army benefits, although he's pretty weak in terms of that. Though the extra grudges can make up for that, but I'm not too sold on that. Like 5 melee attack against greenskins is not worth it. Is not really worth all that much. I personally feel anyway. Like just melee attack or melee weapon strength is not that great. Leadership doesn't generally matter with the dwarves because you already have amazing leadership, so all these skills just kind of feel relatively pointless. But this skill line over here is great. And besides, you get more, like if you want to talk about army benefits in a fight, it's like the High King skill is worth it a lot more than these grudge skills anyway. But yeah, Thorgrim is in a good spot in terms of faction-wide benefits, campaign benefits. He is, however, the weakest of all of them in terms of combat potential because he's slow, though you don't necessarily need them to be fast. That's the thing. The reason you don't need them to be fast is what you may want from Dwarf Lords is for them to soak a lot of damage, which Thorgrim can absolutely do. Something that Grombrindal may struggle with, or Ungrim can struggle with. Belegar does a pretty damn good job when it comes to it, but Belegar doesn't have the campaign benefits that Thorgrim does. So, Thorgrim, number 2 on this list. And in some ways, despite the fact that he does have a rough campaign starting situation with like all the orcs around him, he's actually very well suited to dealing with them. Something that can't necessarily be said about Belegar or Ungrim. He also has some pretty good starting grudges, like he's got a really good starting grudge situation. Though you may have some issues getting the Master Rune of Spite for Skarsnik because you have to win 5 individual battles against him, which can be something of an issue when you really consider it. The reason it can be something of an issue is because you can wipe out Skarsnik far faster than that, and then you waste turns doing it, whereas you might want to do some other more important stuff like moving your army to deal with Warzak here. But either way, although you're not necessarily in the best starting position and you only start with the tier 1 settlement, once you overcome your initial hurdles, you're in a pretty good position. And crucially, you've got good scalability in terms of your campaign because of the improved commandments. That's why Thorgrim is in number 2. Like, campaign effects, like, there's a lot of lords with good individual armies. There's a lot of lords that buff one army or another. But the best lords, from my perspective, are the ones that buff their faction the most overall. Because you're not just going to run with one army if you're playing this game in Immortal Empires. You're going to be running with 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 and all that. And the one lord that can buff that, or buff your settlements, which Thorgrim does. Like, Grombrindal buffs your armies. Thorgrim buffs your settlements. Both of those are great because they allow you to have a better control on the campaign map. So that's why Thorgrim is so high up on this list. And number 3 is Belegar Ironhammer. Now, don't get me wrong, Belegar is really strong as a lord, and he does have these immortal ghost heroes, which are also pretty strong, though they're not as good as regular heroes, though they do get a leg up compared to regular heroes. But he does have certain downsides. He has plus 50% upkeep until Caracade Peaks is recaptured, which, yeah, it's a pretty big deal when it comes to his economy. And it's not like he starts with a lot in terms of his economy. In fact, his starting economy is relatively weak. Once you do take Caracade Peaks, things do become better, but it is a journey of suffering. He does start with these 4 Angrund ancestor heroes, but you can get them, if I'm not mistaken, if you confederate with him. And even if you can't get them, if you confederate with him, it doesn't really matter all that much, I feel. But yeah, you probably can get them, if I'm not mistaken. You get 10 leadership on laying siege or encircling with all armies. That's not really too substantial. The reason that's not too substantial is that if you're laying siege as a dwarf, leadership is a non-factor. The reason it's a non-factor is because, look at this. Like, I've got the tier 5 settlement. How do you think I'm going to lay siege with this ranged army? Do you think I'm going to waltz in past the walls? No, I'm going to use the grudge throwers to tear down the walls and the wall towers. And then once the towers and the wall towers are down, I'm just going to use my rangers to kill everything inside. And if I can't, then I'll waltz in the heroes after half the enemy army is dead, half the garrison is dead. Or I'll just simply auto-resolve this entire thing with ease. No issue whatsoever, because guess what? I've got Thorgrim over here with his entire army. Belegar and Thorgrim teaming up. So, faction-wide benefits, not really worth it. Oh, what about Vanguard deployment during underway? Underway battles. If it was Vanguard deployment during all battles, sure, or on defensive, but underway, not really substantial. I don't really see the benefit in that, to be honest with you. Because underway battles are some of the battles where you don't necessarily care too much about that. Like, Vanguard deployment is great in open field battles, but underway battles, not so much. What about that unique structure in Caracade Peaks? Is it the Grand Underway Junction, which is an amazing structure? No. If it was, we'd be having a different discussion here, because 5 Grove, trade tariffs, all that casualty replenishment, that's pretty amazing. But no, it's not that. Though I did kind of ignore it to get it in this campaign. Just goes to show how much you care about Caracade Peaks. Like, you get it, of course, and then it's like you don't care. You've got other problems to deal with. But the unique structure is the Ancestor Tombs. The thing is, you're likely going to take Caracade Peaks at tier 2, maybe even tier 1. if you're playing as Belegar. More likely tier 2. It's going to take you a while, even though you do have the goat farm over there. It's going to take you a while to get it to tier 3. Like, this is turn 63 of the campaign. I pretty much won the long... I've won this campaign with the long campaign victory. And, yeah, I'm barely now getting this to tier 4. Carricate Peaks to tier 4. Even though I got it relatively early on. And I have had the barley field and the goat farm here for a while. The unique structure is this. What this basically does is makes it harder to take Carricate Peaks. But by the time you've taken Carricate Peaks and for most of your campaign, it's not going to be under threat. Because if you've taken Carricate Peaks, then yeah, sure, you might fight Warzag and Moors and all that, but they're rarely going to attack it. And if they attack it, they're going to attack with such overwhelming force that this structure is pointless. The Grand Underweight Junction, if that was unique, would matter, but it's not the unique structure he gets. So Belegar's faction campaign benefits are worthless, as far as I see it. However, in spite of me trash-talking his campaign benefits, as a faction, his Lord benefits are substantial. Gets 20% missile block chance for his army. This is a pretty big deal, especially with these boys right here. Because it gives them, like, with all his units, it makes his units that much better. In fact, I'm not gonna lie, he's actually better. He's technically better with Slayers, I shit you not. He's better with Slayers because of that missile block chance than Ungrim. Says something about Ungrim, right? He also gets the ability Mighty Oathstone. If I look at the ability, it gives melee defense and expert charge defense. Pretty good, pretty damn good. Yeah, better with Slayers than Ungrim. I'm not joking. Absolutely not joking. But playing with Slayers as Belegar would be the worst possible thing you can do, considering his skill. That's just his Lord benefits. And leadership when fighting Greenskins, Ogres, and Skaven. Great. Then this is where the fun begins. He only has 2 quest items, but he does get control to all provinces. 4 control to all provinces. Post-battle loot, always great to have. Hammer of Angrand. Substantial melee benefit. 15% ward save. Armor, all that. Pretty great stuff, right? With his items. Then he gets Rally the Holds. What does Rally the Holds do? Well, global recruitment duration, -1 turn. Let me just show you what that means in practice to understand Belegar's power if you have him as a Lord. I've got this army over here in Drakenhof. I'm basically waiting for either the in-game event to pop off or here, but either way, I'm just keeping it garrisoned. 1 turn reduction means that I can recruit, like at this point in the campaign, I do believe there are some other structures that I have that impact this, but basically, all of these units, and I know for a fact that most of them are just affected by Rally the Hold, can be recruited in 1 turn. The entire bloody dwarf roster that I have available, with the exception of organ guns, can be recruited in 1 turn. Cost-wise, of course, it's a big deal, but just being able to recruit an army that quickly, pretty damn significant. Especially when you start adding in some of the unique structures the dwarf gets. But we don't stop there. Recruit rank +2, local recruitment capacity +2, leadership in foreign territory, charge bonus, tunnel warfare. Tunnel warfare is gigantic. 20% missile strength for rangers is a pretty big deal. The bolt thrower benefit, yeah, ignore it. Bolt throwers are not great. They're pretty worthless. Grudge throwers are far better. But missile strength for rangers, very substantial. 200% ammunition for minor units, not really that great because you don't want to use minors if you're playing as Belegar. You might use a few early on though. Hero recruitment feigns all provinces. Hero capacity feigns all provinces. Hero capacity to feigns 2. 10% physical resistance. Yeah, I'm not joking when I'm saying this guy is better with Slayers than fucking Ungrim is. Because you know what? He buffs their survivability by a lot. Like, just the fact he's got 20% missile block chance and 10% missile strength. It's like, you want to talk about the Slayer King? He's right here. It's not Ungrim. I'll get to Ungrim and his shitty campaign in just a second. But, yeah, Belegar is amazing. Thorgrim wins because of his faction benefits. Like, for all the benefits you do get with Belegar, most of those are Lord benefits, and you can confederate them. Now, there's another thing that actually prevents Belegar from being ahead of Thorgrim, beyond the fact that Thorgrim gets better growth, better economy, you name it. There's one other factor. If you're playing as a Dwarf Lord, or rather, if you're not playing a particular Lord, the guy who the most survivability in the campaign is actually Belegar. The guys with some of the worst survivability are Thorgrim. Like, Thorgrim does pretty poorly when you're not playing him in a lot of campaigns that I've noticed. So you're actually far better off to play Thorgrim and then confederate Belegar. Even if you have to slap it around, even if you literally have to declare war against him, just go for it. Confederate him. Confederate him and get his benefits, including, I believe, his ancestor heroes, if I'm not mistaken, on that subject. But even if you don't get the ancestor heroes, it's not the ancestor heroes that matter, I can tell you that much. It's this lovely, lovely skill tree. Campaign movement range. This is pretty crazy. Like, 10% campaign movement range, 15% campaign movement range. Like, we're talking Grombrindal levels of campaign movement range over here. Minus 50% construction cost for settlement buildings faction-wide. Shattering aura during sieges. It's pretty amazing. Yeah, Belegar is a great lord. He's certainly better than, like, when we compare individual lords, he's better than Thorgrim in essentially every way. Though Thorgrim does benefit from that extra rune, from the extra heroes that he does provide in the research rate. But, like, Thorgrim wins out because he gets better faction-wide benefits. Belegar wins out as a lord. Also, Belegar is just very, very durable. Because he's small, he's got a lot of ward save, he's got the block ridiculous amount of block chance. Like, if we look at him, he's got 80% missile block chance. You know what you do with Belegar? You take this bastard and you throw him right in the middle of Orion's entire missile line, and you watch him as he takes literally no damage. That's how ridiculous it is. Also, here's the thing. That's worth saying. Because he does want to benefit rangers. His rangers with a feign, any feign, it doesn't have to be the specific feigns he has, but any feign will do, will Wanderer can get sniped. They can kill these guys over here, can kill an entire enemy army without being seen. Like, you keep Belegar visible, you use him to just get pummeled by the enemy, and it's like, yeah, you give him Talisman of Preservation with his armor, it's like he's gonna have a ridiculous amount of ward save. He can take a lot of damage, let alone his heroes over here, and you kill everything else with the ranger. You kill everything with the rangers. No big deal. He's great in combat. He's got amazing survivability, but actually he doesn't have necessarily the best army, I'd argue, of the Dwarven Legendary Lords. But he's certainly got the most survivability of all the Dwarven Legendary Lords in a fight, and that actually does matter far more than you might think. So Belegar, number 3. The one major thing that keeps him back. 2 major things keep him back. 1, Thorgrim gets better growth, but 2, I'm not gonna mince words. If you can take Caracade Peaks, it's a great campaign. But you have to take Caracade Peaks first. Until you take Caracade Peaks, it's probably the worst campaign in the entire game. Just 50%. Like, if he didn't have 50% upkeep on his units until, like, I would take 25% upkeep and it would be a lot better. Or just a grudge with a lot of severity that you'd have to deal with. I take that over the 50%, because you start here and you have to make all the way through Ekrund. For, like, your shortest path is, yeah, miserable. And if you just rush for it, you're going to have a harsh battle at Caracade Peaks as well. Though you can win it. You have the army to win it. You certainly have the capability to win it. So yeah, Belegar, lots of power. Good heroes as well. Great starting heroes. Just starting with 1 of each type. And that also not affecting your capacity, because, like, their special trait, like, their trait apparently is bugged, but regardless of that, here's the thing. You get each of these heroes gives you extra 1 capacity for their hero type. That's their special trait. Fairly substantial. Not as great because they have 0 armor, though of course they have their own upsides as well, because they are ghosts. They are terrifying as all hell. Being able to strike terror as a terror in a foe is fairly substantial. Fear and terror, fairly substantial. Fear gives you a significant advantage in battle. Great durability with his army, substantial durability with his army. Not the most damage, not the strongest army, but the most durable dwarven army. Now at number 4 we have Thorek Ironbrow. His campaign is much improved since patch 2.2. He used to be the worst dwarf legendary lord, now he's the second worst dwarf legendary lord. Though to be fair, it's not because he doesn't have power with his army or his faction. What really drags him down is his starting grudges. He's got a lot, so he's gonna start halfway with the meter filled, and he's gonna have a rough time getting it down. So he's gonna it's gonna take a while for him to get diplomatic relations control and research benefit. And as I've established, control is a pretty big deal for dwarves because they got poor growth in their settlements. Like I only have 7 growth here in Crix by default. So that is a fairly substantial issue to deal with. Just not having access to this does hurt you in a major way. I don't believe that Thorek should have his artifacts being grudges. I don't think that makes sense in any way. I mean, he should have grudges, don't get me wrong. A grudge against the Lizardmen, considering the fate of Crix and all that kind of stuff. But not necessarily grudges associated with special weapons. Okay, with that in mind, his starting position is horrible. Like, the worst by far. You're isolated, you don't necessarily have a lot of friends. You can make friends with Cetra and Khalida, or you could maybe make friends with Volkmar, though I've actually had Volkmar declare war on me. Like, the Wood Elves here will almost certainly declare war on you. The Last Defenders will almost certainly declare war on you. Manfred may declare war on you. You've got a lot of enemies. And the thing is, you're not in a position in your campaign to just sit around and deal with those enemies. First off, because dwarves have such poor casualty replenishment to begin with, and poor control, poor growth, or they don't have poor control, they have poor growth, but that's tied to control. You can't really take the desert and say, oh, I'm going to sell that. You don't have the money, you don't have the control, you don't have the casualty replenishment to deal with that. Some factions might do it, you're not one of them. You can settle the jungle, because for whatever reason, Thorek can sell jungles. That doesn't make a lot of sense, but it's carryover from Warhammer too. Maybe that should be removed, but of course if that was removed, his campaign would be even worse than his. I would trade being able to settle in the jungle to being able to settle in the desert. That might make his campaign a lot better. I'm not joking with that. Because if I could settle in the desert, oh, this would be good real estate. Like, genuinely, these provinces are great if you can take control of all of them. They got some great structures. But yeah, without being able to settle in them, don't bother, really. So, a really horrible start campaign situation. And his entire campaign is getting these artifact weapons. But the problem is, although the artifact weapons, the artifacts are in, like, a logical progression, with the first one just down here in the Golden Tower. The issue is, although it's logical, it's a long, long, long road ahead. All the way to Krakadrak. Yeah, that is silly. That is ridiculous. That's nonsensical. And honestly, many of the benefits are not really that great. You generally want to deal with these just to reduce your grudges, not because the benefits themselves are so substantial. Like, let's look at the benefits. What's worth it and what's not? Well, here's what I'm going to say. The Ancestor Hero? Okay, fair enough. It's a feign, though. It's basically a feign. That's it. Anything special with that? Not really. I mean, it's a feign with some improvements with terror and fear, but less survivability. In quite a few ways. The Yokornus are kind of, but not quite. No, certainly not worth the effort. Morgrim's Gear of War. Oh yeah, this is enormous. Like 15% ammo range and missile strength for bolt throwers, grudge throwers, and quarrelers. Whew, you've got the best quarreler army in the entire game, and you get the best quarreler armies in the entire game as Thorek. 100% tradable resources and 10 armor for lords and embedded heroes. Kind of. Somewhat. Your economy will benefit from it, but because you're so isolated, good luck getting the trading partners to really take advantage of that. The Runesmith upgrade. Yeah, cooldown is great. And sundering attacks, kind of, but yeah, not really. What about the Ancestral Runes? Not, like, yeah, Grimir. Okay, I'll take that. but other ones, not worth it. Like, some are mediocre, some are just like, oh, vigor reduction per second, when you have other ways of doing that. Kind of worthless. Oh, unit is invulnerable to damage. Okay, but not great. Like, just not really worth all the effort you're going through. Outside of that, what do you get? Pretty much zilch, faction-wide. Like, oh, hero crew rank +5 runesmiths. Okay, that could be decent. If it was runesmiths and rune lords, I would absolutely say so, but upkeep benefit, again, it's just not really too substantial. And you're not going to struggle with oath gold. So the oath gold from buildings and oath gold cost for crafting runes doesn't really matter at all. Like, you will have so much oath gold that literally I'm using a mod that puts an item in the game. That puts an item in the game for, where is it? Hold on. Yeah, I can't find it. Anyway, there's a craftable priest item for 200 oath gold, and even that 200 oath gold, it's a lot, but it's not gonna break my bank. You do have some starting runes, okay, fair enough, but still, not really worth it as I see it. Faction-wide benefits, starting position horrible. And you do pretty much want to keep Thorek on the move to, you know, sell the grudges. Because if you can get that control and research rate, yeah, you can cheese research by just fighting battles, like just starting research, and then before, like, every battle, like, you know, just not researching something so you can get student and archivist traits. Okay, but you're going to suffer because of loss of diplomatic relations and research rate until you get everything else. That's always been Thorek's problems. Like, I've played that entire campaign as him, even without the starting grudges and with the meter, and still wasn't great. Because here's the problem, fundamental issue. Why I keep harping on about starting position and about the artifacts. To get the artifacts, you're going to have to conquer the territory, basically. That means you're going to end up with a lot of territory that's very exposed in a straight line from down here all the way up here. Very vulnerable, very exposed. You can make alliances, but it has to be a military alliance. You can't just like make a deal to, I know, trade the artifact, which would be far more reasonable. You might create issues, like for instance, let's say Labaras, Khalida takes Lamia. Guess what? You're gonna have to declare war on her, or fighting the Beastmen just for their artifact. Lots of issues with that. Lots of problems that get created. But let's talk about the good things, because Thorek does have some substantial benefits. Like, beyond just getting the flat out the best range units and artillery of all the dwarves, or rather the best grudge throwers and best quarrelers of any dwarven lord, he does have some substantial benefits. He gets 10 armor to his entire army. Best slayers with Thorek? Yeah, genuinely. No joke, it's either him or Belegar that have the best slayers, not Ungrim. I'll get to Ungrim in just a second, his time is coming, but yeah, 10 army for his army. Pretty substantial. Reload time reduction for those grudge throwers and quarrelers. On top of this, yeah, pretty gigantic. Pretty gigantic. He's got the strong melee army and the best ranged army that the dwarves can muster in the campaign. And that's just by default, really, without anything. Then he's got this special skill tree. Now, he's got the Anvil of Doom, good mount, right? He's got substantial benefits to runes and casting runes, as you might imagine. He's literally got the skill over here. Like, he's got the skill to cause fear and reduce the cooldown of the Rune of Wrath. And he gets the Master Rune of Wrath. Even better. On top of that, he gets a benefit to rune magic cooldowns. He gives Master Rune of Stormy Redbeard for Runesmith, melee attack and leadership to all allies in range. The leadership doesn't really matter too much for dwarves because they have great leadership. Melee attack does. Oath gold from buildings, pretty pointless, but construction cost and construction time, more importantly, pretty substantial. Runic talismans, ward save, Master Rune of Spite. Oh yes, that is pretty damn great. Passive ability, Master Rune of Spite and Rune of Grooming, so missile resistance. Great. And this is where things get ridiculous. He gets anti-large projectiles, Tome and Antargus for grudge throwers, armor-piercing missile damage, 50% for quarrelers, and explosives for bolt throwers, actually making bolt throwers more useful with Rune of Burning. And then finally he gets Frenzy for his entire army and charge bonus. He's got flat out the best army of all the Dwarven Legendary Lords, by far and away. Strong melee army, strong ranged army, by far the strongest ranged army in the entire game. He has the worst possible campaign situation, but he's got the strongest army to deal with that. But it's not enough. Like, I like Thorek in a lot of ways, like just the sheer power that this guy has, but it's not enough. The best Legendary Lords are the ones that buff their faction. Thorek just doesn't offer enough with that to make up for all the issues. Like, yeah, buffing all his armies with the Gears of War and getting armor and all that, that is substantial, don't get me wrong, but it's like, what does he do for economy? And the bigger issue is, like, to get those upgrades, you need to expand across a very exposed line of territory that's going to make your campaign a miserable hell. The easiest and best campaigns are ones where you can where you have the initiative to decide the engagements. Because the territory you're taking is so exposed from here to all the way to Krakadrak, it means you're going to be fighting a lot along the way. Now, you can win those fights. Don't get me wrong, you are very well suited to win those fights. But it is genuine misery to win this campaign, to deal with this campaign. In part because you need to deal with a lot. To win this campaign, it's not like you can ignore the artifacts. No, you need to get his short campaign victory condition. His short, not as long. He's got 8 total artifacts. He needs to get 5 for short campaign. Just to know what short would require. You're basically looking at 10 of these settlements. 10, right? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. You can remove 2 of them if you get the one here by Rapunz and the one here. But yeah, it's a long journey of suffering. You think Belegar's journey is one of suffering because of 50% upkeep? It's got nothing on Thorek's journey of suffering to be able to just achieve his short campaign victory condition. That means he's going to have fewer heroes because it's so hard to do it. Like, you'll be way above this. In fact, you might be close to your long campaign victory condition by the time you've gotten those 5 artifacts. Because it takes so long, you will fall far behind with your other armies because you won't have the hero capacity for those other armies. Like other lords, virtually every other lord might be able to beat you to it when it comes to the short campaign victory condition if you're playing as Thorek. So yeah, genuinely the worst, one of the worst campaign situations, but he's not at the lowest point of the list just because he does have good armies, especially if he gets the Gears of War. Until that point, but without those Gears of War, he doesn't have anything special. His economy is weak because he doesn't have trading partners. He's isolated, so he doesn't have allies. And he's only got, and this is something that has to be weighed, he does have two quest items, but they're not especially great either. So, yeah, he's in a rough spot. He's in a really, really rough spot. I think, here's my view. I think Thorek would be a lot better if he had, if he was a Horde faction, Dwarven Horde faction, because that's kind of what he is in lore. He's searching for these artifacts. He's not settling down in forgotten Dwarven holds, resettling Dwarven holds. He's moving around to bust elements and get these artifact weapons. Like if he was a Horde army, that would be a very different situation. But he's not a Horde army. So maybe just a perspective when it comes to that. Strong in combat, but weak on the campaign. That's Thorek in a nutshell. If you can confederate this guy, ooh, he is amazing. As a confederation option, like he's gonna give you one of the best armies that you can get. Like him and Belegar give you a lot when it comes to your army potential. But yeah, just not worth playing. Finally, at number 5, and the worst legendary lord of the dwarves by far campaign-wise, battle-wise, faction benefit-wise, it is Ungrim Ironfist. Like, I said at the start here that Grombrindal is by far and away the best. The difference between Ungrim and Thorek is just as large as the difference between Grombrindal and Thorgrim. Yeah, it's a pretty big difference. In fact, Ungrim is probably the most useless legendary lord that you can have in the campaign. At most, you could use him as a lord killer, though he's not the best at that. I mean, he's the best of the dwarves, but he's not the best in the game at that. And you still need his items to make that work. But he's not going to buff your army in any special way that actually matters. And he's certainly not going to have faction-wide benefits. Like, his faction-wide benefits might as well be thrown in the garbage. Oh, construction costs for Slayer Shrines. Okay, fair enough. They can be a bit expensive. But are they? Really? I mean, yeah. They're not. I mean, just gonna say it. Like, if you're constructing Slayer Shrines, let's just talk about this. If you're constructing Slayer Shrines, you've got tier 3 settlements. Fair enough. But that means you're already in the point in the campaign where you will have tens of thousands of gold because of all the battles you're fighting. So that kind of reduction benefit is not really worth it. Minus 50% recruitment cost for Slayer units. Again, not really a substantial benefit as far as I see it. In terms of faction-wide benefits, let's be clear on this. Now, 10% speed for infantry units, that's okay, but it's not exactly great. The dwarf playstyle, even with the extra movement speed, like, you're never really gonna be the most agile on the battlefield. Like, yeah, you get 44 speed. Many other factions run in circles around you, even with that extra speed that you get. So the faction-wide benefits, pretty awful. What about Ungrim's skill tree? Minus 25% upkeep for Slayers, 5 melee attack for Slayers, and Journey's End. The upkeep is okay to allow you to even get Slayers in good numbers in your army, because yeah, recruitment cost means zilch if you don't pay less for them, because they can be a bit expensive on the upkeep side, but you can get them much cheaper. And you can also make it cheaper with the Slayer Ward. Okay, fair enough, so that works, at least. But melee attack and Journey's End, they're not great. Like, there's a reason when talking about Belegar and Thorek that I mentioned that they had better Slayer armies. Hell, even Thorgrim has better Slayer armies if you can get hammerers next to those Slayers. But why is that? Well, Journey's End, well, all it does is, like, it prevents entities from dying while your HP is greater than 75%. The problem with that is Slayers take a lot of damage because they've got 0 armor. Ooh, they're shielded, so he says. Yeah, they're shielded, but they're still gonna take a substantial amount of damage, even with the shield. And the shield is literally just because of the whirling axes. Now, if we're talking about 50% missile block like Belegar can get, yeah, that's one thing. That's one major benefit. But the way Slayers are, they just take way too much damage. They take way too much damage from range. They take way too much damage in melee. Yeah, melee, they'll take a lot of damage in melee. So they'll lose a lot of entities, even with Journey's End. Even with Journey's End, because it stops working. And you end up in a situation where garrisons, I'm not joking on this, where garrisons, if you literally send your Slayer units against garrisons, they'll get torn to shreds. I mean, you won't lose the battle. You'll still win it fairly easily, but you'll lose a lot of individual models. If you're playing as Ungrim, you need basically a ranged army to do most of the fighting for you and just send those Slayers to mop up. You're keeping the reason you're doing that is, I've made the point and again and again and again that dwarves have bad casualty replenishment. Guess what happens when you lose a lot of individual models in a battle and you can't recover from that very easily? You get decimated in the next battle. Like, literally, Ungrim has an issue to even beat his initial enemy, who's a pathetic, weak greenskin faction that any other dwarf lord would annihilate with ease with dwarf warriors. Hell, even Ungrim can annihilate them with ease with dwarf warriors, but not with Slayers. Not with Slayers. So, the whole benefits he had, like if he had physical resistance for Slayers, faction-wide, if he had the trait like some other legendary lords like Oxyotl, who buffs his kinks to get extra benefits as they go higher in rank, if he had missile resistance and damage reduction or armor for his Slayers, that would be very substantial and would make the playstyle work, but as it stands, it just doesn't really work. The best I think you could do is just get the Rune of Oath and Seal, but then you're losing abilities to use the Rune of Wrath and Ruin. So yeah, it's a major trade-off. I guess you could play with multiple runesmiths and Ungrim's army to make the Slayer playstyle work, but what's the damn point? I mean, honestly, like, I'm not even joking on this. It's like playing with an army like this. Like, this is just a demonstration. Because I genuinely believe that if you're playing Ungrim, an army like this will do a far, far better job. Even for all the benefits that Ungrim has with Slayers, not that they're very substantial. Like, he gets 5 melee attack by default, okay. And then he gets 5 more through the Slayer skill, and 10 versus large with Dragon Slayer. That is it. So Ungrim's playstyle Slayers, awful. Absolutely awful, not worth it. He also has a really bad starting campaign situation. Now, Thorek wins the grudge meter contest hands down, but Ungrim is actually very close to him in terms of how much he has in terms of starting grudges. And it's not necessarily gonna be very easy to deal with those starting grudges as well. Don't play Ungrim as a dedicated Slayer hero. Play more as a generic Dwarf Lord. You'll actually have a much better time. But even then, it's gonna be a journey of suffering for a number of reasons that I'll get into. So his army-wise, like, even if you recruit them as a Lord, fuck the Slayers, really. Maybe get a couple, like 2, 4, something like that. But more than that, it's just a waste of time and energy. I've gotten so many because you start with the structure here, because KaraKadrin gets the Slayer Shrine of KaraKadrin, so that allows you to get that at tier 2, as opposed to needing tier 3. But I've abandoned it. I've destroyed it. I got all the Slayers I wanted, and it's like, yeah, I need the economy, because you don't have a great starting economy, and you don't actually have the diplomatic relations benefit that Thorgrim does to get trade agreements done very early. Okay. Beyond the fact that the starting benefits are worthless, his unique structure here only gives him a corruption benefit, which anyway a Slayer Shrine does do regardless. Like the special shrine, which anyone can get anyway, like it only gives you like a 5% upkeep for Slayers faction wide, and that's pretty much it. And 35% recruitment cost for Slayers. Okay, so you can recruit Slayers very cheaply as Ungrim if you're recruiting them in KaraKadrin. Not really worth it, honestly, as I see it. They're pretty bad units if they're in your hands, like in the hands of the AI with all the battle benefits the AI gets. Yeah, they're pretty scary, but in your hands, not so much. Not really so much. They're pretty scary because they won't run away. They won't do so well in Auto Resolve either, because although they have unbreakable leadership, that does count for a benefit in Auto Resolve. The fact they have 0 armor counts a lot, and they'll take a lot of damage as well in Auto Resolve. They'll take a lot of damage in manual battles as well. Like if I'm playing with an army of Quarrelers or Dwarf Warriors, or a combination of both, or Dwarf Warriors, Quarrelers, and Grudge Throwers, the battle tactics are ridiculously simple. I actually have to put down a lot of effort to win battles if I'm playing as Ungrim, because the army is going to take a lot of damage, and very rarely are you going to be able to just throw your Slayers at the enemy and win with ease. And generally you need the enemy line to engage and then flank around the Slayers. Really, you need the melee front line to really use Slayers properly in a range line to do damage. So lots of issues with that when we're looking at Ungrim. He does have free items. The one benefit Ungrim has is that in terms of individual battle skill, or rather individual damage, he can do the most. He's got great survivability with 30% ward save. He gets control in local provinces, items that reduce, like basically can recruit Slayers for free if he's recruiting them in an upgraded KaraKadrin in more recruit rank. He's got a great amount of survivability, great amount of damage, but he actually has a really hard starting position. Like, Thorek might have a harder campaign overall, because he's got to expand all the way up. But in terms of starting position, you're in a far rougher state. Let me explain why. You've got a grudge to kill Vlad, basically, or fight Vlad, to a degree. Vlad can beat the crap out of you. Then you've got the grudge to beat the Silver Pinnacle. You can win against them, but you'll take a lot of damage in return, and leave yourself exposed to the east if you take all of this territory. So, you don't want that. Then you've got the grudge to deal with Azag. Now, I've done guides on this channel, and I just want to say that dealing with either Vlad or Azag can be a monumental challenge in its own, with a good army, with a faction that's much better than Dwarfs. Dealing with both Azag and Vlad as your initial challenge presented by the game is a very different affair. Azag, for instance, declared war on me. Vlad may very well follow suit over here soon enough. And then there's the question of Skarsnik, because don't think you're just don't think you can ignore Skarsnik, because surprise, surprise, you can't. You know how I've made the point, if you're playing Katrin, that she's one of the worst legendary lords in the game because she's got free potential, that she has to fight at least 3 legendary lords from the start. Guess who also has to fight 3 legendary lords from the start? And you don't have the magical benefits and Khazar benefits that Katrin has. You have units that are, sure, they can do a lot of damage, they won't break or flee, but they'll take a lot of damage and you can't replenish them very easily. This is a modded campaign with a post-battle benefit from a quest battle over here to make it up. But even then, you're going to have, even with mods, you're still going to have issues with that, because the battle abilities of Slayers just aren't that great. And that brings me to Skarsnik. Most of the time that I've played a campaign, or attempted to play a campaign as Ungrim, Thorgrim struggles greatly against Skarsnik. He loses ground, he might get to Karazakarak besieged, and you have to basically bail him out. Now, you can beat Skarsnik. You may not be able to beat Vlad early on, until you bring 2 full armies to bear against him. That's because Vlad is, well, insane, to put it mildly. He's got 2 full stacks over here, he's getting a 3rd. You can understand the issues that come with it. And Vlad himself is much better as a combatant than Ungrim is early on. So you don't have the army power, you don't have the faction power. You may have a Lord Killer with Ungrim, but that's roughly it. That's pretty much it. And you've got a horrible starting campaign situation. You've got horrible starting grudges. Like, just having to deal with this, like that's and that's on top of the random grudges it spawned. You're at risk of, not necessarily angry, but you're at risk of losing, like, you're at risk with Irked, of not having Irked, so diplomatic relations, research, all that will be affected. You've got even a grudge to take this particular settlement, which is pretty far away there, and would make you exposed to Archeon and Norska over there. Yes. And on top of that, like, let's say you help Thorgrim, this is where it gets even nastier. Let me just look at this. I'm at war with both Treach and Azag. I can ignore Azag, what Draika's weakened him. Though that doesn't always happen. It sometimes can go very much in your way. Sometimes Azag and Vlad show up with 4 stacks at your doorstep and you lose the campaign. It's a bit random. It can go very badly against you if you're playing as Ungrim, and you just don't have the tools to deal with that, because he's just a generic lord who's only benefiting units that aren't that great. And he's not even giving them the benefits they need. Slayers would be much better if they got the survival benefit, but that's not what Ungrim provides them. Yes, Journey's End, you might say, oh, it's a survival benefit. I'll take the armor benefit of some other lords, or the block chance benefit that Belegar has any day over Ungrim's melee attack and Journey's End benefit. Any single day. And what about cost reduction and upkeep reduction? Not really that great either. I mean, it is a nice benefit, but it's like, compared to what the others get, yeah, far behind. The better diplomacy, like, not having diplomatic benefit, like, just look at the situation, like Zofbar, for whatever reason, hates me, like historical relations and all that. Even getting a deal with Thorgrim is an issue.
Sigma's will.
Though I can certainly benefit from non-aggression pacts with some factions, some of the smaller factions. Like I got a decent amount of money from Ostermark, because once they lose their starting armies, they will pay you a decent amount for a non-aggression pact before they get wiped out inevitably by Draika and by the unholy or unholy duel of Draika and Azak, just before Draika and Azak decide to declare war on each other, which happens more often than not. But yeah, Ungrim's campaign is a horrible start, no scalability, no strong army. Only thing he's got is he personally is strong, but he's not comparable to the strength of other lords. And you know what, I'll take Thorgrim tanking the damage that he can on that bloody throne of his, even though Thorgrim does far less damage. But I don't need Thorgrim to do damage, I need Thorgrim to take damage. I don't need Ungrim to do damage, I need him to take more damage so that the range units in my army can do it. Like, Ungrim is so worthless from my perspective that the only reason you would actually get him as a Confederation option would be to give him a generic army, maybe 2 Slayers, 3, 4, whatever. A couple of Slayers, but not too many. Give him a generic Dwarven army of Quarrelers and Grudge Throwers, and just use him as bait for your ranged units to kill everything in sight. And that's it. And that's purely because he's got these items that give him a lot. Or he could just, you know, take the items. Just give them to or you can't, sorry, but yeah, or maybe just use him as bait. That's all there is to it, pretty much. That's all I'm gonna say really with regards to it. It's just not worth it. He's absolutely not worth playing. He's the worst by far. I mean, Thorek might have bigger issues long term, but Thorek also gets some benefits long term. Once you do get those artifact weapons, Ungrim will never get any benefit long term. That's why he's the worst. Worst army, worst starting position, worst scalability, worst everything really. Costin here signing out. Don't forget to subscribe, like, enable notifications, and stay tuned for more.